The stakes have never been higher in Boruto's manga. There's so many theories connecting the dots that go all the way back to the origins of the universe. Is Shibai really future Boruto? Is Himawari destined to become the next Kaguya? And will Sarada wield the Renegades of Madara? These are some of the best theories that stemmed from the events of Boruto's manga that truly encapsulates the absolute madness that is this franchise. So today we're going to rank the top 6 theories of 2025 that range from very likely to an almost certainty. Make sure you stay for number 1 because that one changes everything.
Guess this was the only possible outcome.
That's right. The age of shinobi is over.
At number 6 we have Himawari is becoming the next Kaguya. Chapter 25 confirmed one of my longest running theories, that Himawari is slowly becoming Kaguya. This all stems from Kurama's statement about her being a special kind of Jinchuriki, one that blurs the line between man and beast. It isn't a new concept because this happened a long time ago when Kaguya merged with the Ten Tails. You see, evolution as a power mechanic has taken different forms within the Naruto universe, whether that's the various stages of the Sharingan, Naruto's many Rasengans, and even the very concept of the new generation surpassing what came before them. So it isn't anything new to the universe itself, and I believe we're seeing it happen in Boruto as well. You see, Himawari possessing this miniature version of Kurama within her body does raise questions about the relevance to the current power system. Is this truly the power Damon thought could easily dodge his attack? Well, based on Ikimoto's recent interview, that does appear to be the case, but it's a bit more complicated. He said, and I quote, "Damon felt the future synergy potential of Kurama and Himawari, who is of Uzumaki and Hyuga bloodline." Now, put aside the absolute brokenness of Damon's ability to sense future potential, there is a bit more to Himawari than simply being Kurama's Jinchuriki. She's special, just like Kaguya was. You see, this reveal came in chapter 690 of Naruto's manga, when Kaguya transformed into the Getter statue, which is of course the body of the Ten Tails itself. If anything, the Ten Tails should have been extracted from her body, as was the case for Madara and the other Biju. Yet for some reason that didn't happen. Kaguya didn't just transform into the Ten Tails, she was also sealed alongside it. Why is that? Well, the answer to that question was revealed in chapter 681, which came in the form of Black Zetsu saying that the Ten Tails isn't just the divine tree, but also Kaguya herself as well. Even Hagoromo didn't know this truth, which explains the contradictions in the story he told to Naruto. What this means is that while Himawari is the first human to achieve this state between man and beast, she isn't the first person. Kaguya found a way to merge with the Ten Tails, and this led to her awakening a unique Biju form, which manifested in the form of a giant rabbit. In fact, she became the 10th tail of the Ten Tails, as shown when all the Biju chakra was extracted from the host body. So this explains why Naruto the Last stated that Hamura stayed on the moon to guard the Ten Tails, not Kaguya, because they didn't know that Kaguya was also the Ten Tails, which by the way is backed up by this databook statement. So in essence, this all adds up to Kaguya's chakra being the same as a Biju's chakra, because not only did she consume its chakra fruit, she also managed to merge with the beast and became a Biju herself. With that said, how does this explain Himawari's hidden power and her somehow having Tail Beast chakra? Well, I believe that she didn't just inherit the Tail Beast power from Naruto, which was suggested by Kurama himself, but she also awakened Kaguya's chakra as well. This has been hinted at multiple times by multiple sources. First by Kurama saying that this was her destiny brought into being by the Uzumaki and Hyuga blood that flows within her body. The statement by Ikimoto himself, which once again references the underlying genetic factor to her bloodline. She's even compared to Shinju beings such as Jura, who himself is a Biju that gained sentience. This all ties back to why her chakra has a greater affinity to Kurama's, even more so than Naruto. The secret lies in a genetic component Naruto himself did not possess, which is both halves of Kaguya's bloodline.
I shall rule over this entire world, together with my children.
I've said this before, but this isn't anything new. If we simply go by the logic established in this universe, to truly awaken the power of Hagoromo's chakra, one must combine the chakra of his two sons, Ashura and Indra. And because Hashirama and Madara were reincarnations of Indra and Ashura, Madara was able to awaken Hagoromo's chakra, thus manifesting the Rinnegan by grafting Hashirama's cells into his own wounds. The precedent set here is that one can awaken the parent chakra by combining the chakra of both branches, which means Kaguya's chakra would awaken within Himawari and Boruto, since they both now possess the chakra of both her sons. Now, this awakening can manifest in different ways. Whereas Boruto strongly inherited the powers of the Otsutsuki in the form of the Jogan, Himawari manifested Kaguya's Biju-like body. It's somewhat similar to how the sons of Hagoromo manifested his Otsutsuki powers in different ways. Indra awakened the spiritual power which manifested in his Dojutsu prowess, while Ashura awakened the body of the sage. This is what Kurama meant in chapter 25 when he said that Himawari should think of herself as a personification of chakra in human form. That is the essence of a Biju, which is what Kaguya, after merging with the Ten Tails, came to be. They became one body and soul, which is why Kaguya and the Gedo statue were one and the same. Now, this also goes a bit further because the merger of these chakras doesn't just manifest powers, but also the essence of the person themselves. Take Mr. Hagoromo for example. He was able to manifest himself in the realm of the living because the lower half of Madara's body, after becoming the Ten Tails Jinchuriki, then contained the chakra of the Nine Tails, Indra and Ashura. He was only able to emerge like he did because all of their chakra were finally one, as he himself said. Now, what's interesting about this is the inclusion of the Nine Tails chakra. It does make sense why Madara was able to awaken Hagoromo's chakra and the Rinnegan by combining the chakra of his two sons. But for some reason that wasn't enough for Hagoromo himself to manifest, even if he wanted to. For some reason the Nine Tails chakra is also a necessity. But why? Hagoromo was the Jinchuriki of the Ten Tails at one point in time, but he didn't merge his essence with it similar to Kaguya. He also wasn't the Jinchuriki of the Ten Tails or any of the Biju when he died, since he sealed it on the moon and scattered the tail beast across the planet. So why would a Biju's chakra be needed for him to manifest the way he did in the war? Well, the answer is actually obvious. You see, the chakra of the Biju is very special in that while it does obey the laws of conservation of energy in some sense, which is that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed from one form to another, it also takes it a bit further, in that the energy also retains its prior form and characteristics, thus the Nine Tails being reborn as the same Kurama with his memories intact. These entities are in essence immortal, in the sense that they can be killed but they will always return. Now, this should also make sense when it comes to Mr. Hagoromo. By himself, he isn't able to achieve this phenomenon. It's only a process possible through the use of Tail Beast Chakra, a chakra that has an inbuilt component which allows it to bring entities back from the dead. So in combining that chakra with Hagoromo's chakra, which is the combination of Ashura and Indra, that also aided in the resurrection of Hagoromo himself. Though of course it's only a temporary state since he isn't the Biju himself, but that's just my headcanon. With that said, what does this have to do with Miss Himawari? Well, Himawari, just like Madara's body, possesses the chakra of Kaguya's two sons. Hagoromo's chakra through Naruto, his blood descendant, and Hamura's chakra through Hinata. She also possesses the chakra of the Nine Tails, which means that she has the mechanic by which resurrection is possible. What this means is that if the manga was to remain consistent with this established mechanic, Kaguya should be able to resurrect through Himawari's body. And the crazy thing about this is that this might have already happened. Kurama himself suggested that she might have been born inheriting a piece of his chakra, which means that Himawari at the point of birth already met the requirements for this phenomenon to occur. This would explain why Himawari's personality changes whenever she taps into that power. It's almost as if she becomes a different person altogether. She doesn't even remember the events that take place while she's under this influence. And that's because she does become a different person, more confident, indifferent, and cold, just like Kaguya. This is funny because it was actually foreshadowed back in chapter 692 when Hagoromo told Naruto that he suspects that Kaguya's personality changed after she consumed the chakra fruit, and he also hopes that Naruto doesn't become like Kaguya, even with all the chakra of all 9 Biju. So instead of Naruto becoming like Kaguya, his daughter inherited that trait instead. It's kind of a mirror to what's happening with Boruto and Momoshiki. They're slowly becoming one over time, while Himawari is somewhat flipping between 2 personalities. This other version of Himawari isn't Kaguya per se, but a merger of her essence and Himawari's. Now, of course, I'm not saying that Himawari has all the abilities of Kaguya or she's gonna manifest the Rennin Sharingan, but she might be the vehicle by which Kaguya returns to the story. Or we might also see her manifest Kaguya's rabbit Biju form, or she gets one of her own. I mean, she is more of a Biju at this point in time herself, so it wouldn't be far-fetched. Now, there's also the possibility that Kurama retained his Baryon mode powers. You see, it all goes back to chapter 55, I believe, when Kurama explained that the form uses both of their chakras as fuel to create the Baryon mode energy, to the point where he says that my chakra and yours will get consumed until one or both of our lives run out. He then later clarified that the price for Baryon mode was his life, which means that it was consuming his chakra at a higher rate than Naruto's. That is why Kurama's entire chakra pool ended up getting consumed, which eventually led to his death. Now, what this also means is that Kurama's entire chakra pool was transformed into this new Baryon energy, which means that if Kurama was to re-emerge, his chakra pool should be made up of that Baryon mode chakra, not the chakra that he had before. We have to remember that the entire process of a tail beast re-emerging after the death of their Jinchuriki is just their remaining chakra leaving the body and reforming somewhere else. So if that base chakra has changed into something else, something a bit more powerful, the new thing will be the base material behind what comes next. So if this is indeed what happened, that would explain why Damon felt Himawari could dodge his strike based on the power he sensed within her body. That's the same power that was stated to exceed Ishiki's, someone likely stronger than Damon. It also makes sense why he would refer to that feeling as intensity, since Kurama compared it to a byproduct of nuclear fusion, which is similar to what happens in the sun. This also lines up with Kitsune's turning silver once they achieve the power of gods, which is what happened to Kurama once all of his chakra turned into Baryon mode energy, thus losing his normal color and turning into silver. Though it could also be the case that this is more so now a form that he can attain later on once Himawari is ready to achieve that state. I would bet that since Himawari has the body of a Biju, that of the original Otsutsuki that merged with the Ten Tails, she likely wouldn't have the same drawbacks Naruto did using that form, but I guess we'll see. Also, this is kind of a side bit to touch on at the end, but note that Himawari loves to wear clothing that has a sunflower design on it. Well, it is important to note that rabbits love sunflowers, and of course, Kaguya's Biju state is a rabbit, so keep that in mind.
Can't sleep? I'll stay with you.
At number 5, we have Sarada awakens Madara's Renegans.
If I use the Rinnegan's true powers, we should see a more intriguing battle.
Sarada, like her father Sasuke and his predecessors before him, will eventually go blind. That is the trade-off for attaining the power of the Mangekyo. It isn't eternal, but it can be. You see, there are multiple ways in which Sarada can awaken the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, and one of those ways would be to take the eyes of Madara Uchiha. Now this might sound crazy since Madara died at the end of Naruto's manga. This was after the tail beasts were extracted from his body and he was separated from Kaguya, which of course would result in his death, as was the case for the other Jinchuriki. So one would assume that Madara wouldn't play an important part in the story going forward, but there are ways to make it happen. You see, Madara's soul did leave the mortal plane, but his body remained, which of course includes his eyes that attain the power of the Rinnegan. Now this might sound familiar since it happened before. The Rinnegans that were used by Naruto and Obito belonged to Madara. He implanted his eyes into Kid Naruto's eye sockets without him knowing, and then died of old age sometime afterwards. Obito showed that it was also possible to maintain these eyes in some kind of liquid or stasis pod, which is how he preserved the eyes from the Uchiha clan massacre for multiple years. The point is that it's very easy for the writer to make this happen if he wanted to, and it would make perfect sense if he did. With that said, one thing to point out is that the Eternal Mangekyo is formed when one implants the eyes of a close blood relative. The powers of both eyes will then combine into one, thus attaining an eternal light, which the writer visualized with the Shinigami that had 2 empty eye sockets that were then filled by the light of the new eyes. So this process can be done by using the eyes of a parent, sibling, or even a very close cousin. Though it is important to note that it was never stated that one has to be a very close blood relative or family member. Itachi simply said that it had to be a blood relative that's a clansman, which could be anyone in the Uchiha clan since they're all connected by blood and share the same ancestor. I will say that it makes more sense that it has to be a close blood relative since Obito didn't use any of the Sharingans from the massacre to awaken his own Eternal Mangekyo. Though of course that could be because none of them had the Mangekyo, which was also never stated to be a necessity, but even if it was, we know that Sasuke's father had the Mangekyo, so there's that. Either way, I do think it's very plausible for Sarada to awaken the Eternal Mangekyo using Madara's eyes since her father shares a deep connection to him. That of course being the fact that they're both reincarnates of Indra, which would make Sasuke Madara's next life. And this was also brought up by Madara in the war as well, when he said that Sasuke having the Chokutome Mangekyo is likely because they share a connection deeper than blood, which is also why he thought Sasuke's eyes would work perfectly for him. So since Madara is Indra and Sasuke is Madara and Indra, wouldn't that be a close enough connection for Sarada to awaken the Eternal Mangekyo using Madara's eyes? There's also the fact that similar to Madara and their father Sasuke, Sarada also has the Chokutome Mangekyo, which again led Madara to believe that he and Sasuke shared a connection deeper than blood. Despite the fact that Madara himself of course didn't awaken the Chokutome, he gained it after taking the eyes of his brother Izuna to awaken the Eternal Mangekyo. But I addressed that in the Sarada Chokutome video, so more information on that in that video if you want it. The point is that Madara shares a close enough connection to Sarada by simply being a previous incarnation of her father, so it can work if the writer wants it to. Another thing to point out is that this might be how Sarada gains the power of the Rinnegan. Yes, Madara's Rinnegans were deactivated when he died since he only had his Sharingans activated. At least that is what happened in the anime version of events. In the manga, his eyes were hazed and grayed out similar to Itachi's when he was on the verge of death. Some took this to mean that Madara went blind for some reason, but that certainly wasn't the case. Madara had the Eternal Mangekyo, which means that his eyes will never lose their light. So the hazed effect or grayed out effect shown in the manga is simply what Kishimoto and many manga authors use when a character is dying, which is likely why it was changed for the anime. But even if it was the case that he lost his light for some reason, we know for a fact that this doesn't mean that the eyes are dead, as seen by Sasuke using Itachi's eyeballs to this day. This just means that the power was sealed off, which is the downside to attaining such power as explained by Itachi, but it can be reawakened by implanting that eye into the eye socket of a blood relative, preferably a parent or sibling. So whether we use the anime where Madara died with the Sharingans active or the manga continuity, the eyes are still usable if preserved. Now, as I mentioned before, in addition to Madara no longer having the Sharingans activated in the manga continuity, we can also see that the Rinnegans mysteriously disappeared. However, this doesn't mean that he lost the dojutsu, since it was shown that Madara could deactivate and activate his Rinnegans whenever he wants to, as seen when he activated both his Rinnegans to absorb Naruto's Rasengan, and when he later met Hashirama with only one of his Rinnegans activated. So we can come to the logical conclusion that Madara only having his Sharingans activated at the point of death per the anime continuity wasn't because he lost his Rinnegan's for some unknown reason, but more so because he was heavily fatigued and couldn't maintain using it. Now it was explained by Kakashi in part 1 that they normally burn a ninja's body upon the point of death, so the corpse doesn't yield up the secrets to the skills the body once held. In fact, the reason why Tobirama didn't burn Madara's body the first time he died was because he wanted to gain the secrets to Madara's powers. So while we can say that they likely burned Madara's body along with his eyes after the war, I would say that it makes more sense, or it's more likely that they burned the body but kept the eyes. It would be rather foolish to destroy the eyes that has the power to use the most powerful dojutsu in existence at that point in time. And it is somewhat easy to preserve these eyes, as seen with Obito having jars filled with eyeballs of the Uchihas killed during the Uchiha clan massacre that happened over 8 to 9 years prior to that point. So it would be safe to say that they probably have those eyes locked away or gave it to Orochimaru for safekeeping or something. Now that we've explained how Sarada could get these eyes, let's get into how it can boost her power. So we know that the Rinnegan is made up of Hagoromo's 6 paths chakra, which is why the only way to unlock the dojutsu is by merging Ashura's and Indra's chakra to obtain Hagoromo's chakra, as stated by Madara. The other way to awaken this power is by getting the eye directly from Hagoromo himself, which was the case for Sasuke as stated in the data books. Though it is important to note that it appears that one needs to be on the verge of death as well, as was the case for Sasuke and Madara when they both awakened the Rinnegan. So if Sarada gets Madara's eye, she might not trigger the Rinnegan until she's on the verge of death, as was her predecessors. With that said, if Sarada does get Madara's Rinnegans, she will receive a 6 paths chakra buff, since the Rinnegan does supply chakra and power to the body. And we know for a fact that dojutsus do supply chakras, confirmed by Obito when he stated that the chakra and power of Madara's Rinnegans was too much for him to handle. We also have Sasuke stating that he can feel Itachi's power flowing into him after implanting Itachi's eyes to awaken the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. This is also backed up by Kakashi, saying that he can feel the 6 paths chakra in Obito's eyes after Obito gave them back to him during the fight with Kaguya. So what Obito's situation proved is that it doesn't work in one way, or doesn't just work in one way. Dojutsu does amp your chakra and power, but your chakra and power can also amp your dojutsu, as seen by Obito's regular Sharingans being amped by the 6 paths chakra supplied from his body through Madara's Rinnegan. Now what this means is that not only are Madara's Rinnegan's 6 paths chakra amped, they're also 10 Tails Jinchuriki amped and Hashirama Cell amped, as was Obito's right eye, which is why he never went blind from using the Mangekyo Sharingan even though he doesn't have the Eternal Mangekyo. Now we're gonna take these Rinnegans and implant them into Sarada, which means that she will likely be amped by all that power as well and receive the same benefits. Now the funny thing about this is that this isn't even the scary part. If we go back to Naruto, when Obito betrayed Madara and fought alongside Kakashi, Madara, when thinking about how he should kill them, said, "Maybe I should just get it over with quickly and use Limbo." Then said, "No, I shouldn't while Obito has my Rinnegan," which of course is referring to his left eye. Now why would Madara not use Limbo in front of Obito just because he has his Rinnegan? It then tells Madara afraid that a weakened half-dying Obito would somehow defeat him or his Limbo, when Limbo clones are stated to be equal to the user in all aspects. I don't think that's the case. I think it's more likely that Madara didn't want to use Limbo in front of Obito because if he did, Obito would likely become aware of the ability and use it for himself, since he has one of Madara's Rennegans. Now with multiple Limbos, with Rinnegan, 6 paths chakra and Kamui hacks, along with everyone else on the battlefield, it would have likely been more difficult for Madara to win that battle. By the way, for the Boruto fans watching this video, Limbo clones reside in another plane of existence, so someone existing in this plane of existence wouldn't be able to sense or see them, and they also have every ability of the original user, so they're pretty busted. So if we give Sarada Madara's eyes and she triggers his Rinnegan, which she should be able to do since Madara was able to activate Obito's Mangekyo and so was Kakashi, it shouldn't be that different since the Rinnegan is an evolved Sharingan. Sasuke wasn't able to deactivate his eye for some reason, likely because he didn't awaken it naturally over time, but Madara certainly could, as pointed out earlier. So if Sarada triggers his Rinnegan and someone just tells her about Limbo, she should be able to use the ability. Another possibility is that she might gain her own unique Rinnegan ability. This makes sense because every Rinnegan user seems to gain additional unique abilities even though they all possess Hagoromo's Rinnegan, in the sense that Madara awakened Hagoromo's chakra to awaken Hagoromo's Rinnegan, but he also gained a unique ability Hagoromo never displayed, which was Limbo. Then we have Sasuke, who got the Rinnegan from Hagoromo himself, but manifested an ability to switch places with an object and an ability to travel through dimensions. Both abilities Hagoromo never displayed, but maybe he could use the last one and he just didn't. But yeah, what this means is that Sarada might unlock a new unique Rinnegan ability when Madara's Rinnegan mixes with her DNA and mutates, which is my hypothesis on why each Rinnegan user gains a unique ability even though they all possess Hagoromo's Rinnegan. It's by way of genetic mutation or maybe chakra combination. The only Uchiha who didn't awaken a unique Dojutsu ability upon getting Hagoromo's Rinnegan was Obito, but he could barely handle the power of the Rinnegan and opted to not use most of its unique abilities for this very reason. Now as it relates to Sarada, these are just the Rinnegan abilities. We don't even know what her next Mangekyo ability after Ohirume will be, which would be separate from anything the Rinnegan provides of course, but those powers will be amplified by her having the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan Jubi 6 Paths Chakra Amped Rennegans. Speaking of Hashirama cells, another way for Sarada to not go blind while using Mangekyo is simply by having Hashirama cells implanted into her body. And though it wasn't confirmed in the manga itself, it is likely, very likely, that this is the reason why Obito never went blind despite spamming the Mangekyo since the age of 12, nor did he have any side effects. Now of course there is danger in doing this because most people don't survive the integration of Hashirama cells into their bodies, but I'd argue that it should work for Sarada since it worked for both Madara and their father, Sasuke. Now another way for Sarada to awaken the Eternal Mangekyo is by taking the Eye of Sasuke. Not the one that he has left, which initially belonged to Itachi, but the ones he discarded. This of course is very plausible since Obito likely stored those eyes in his lab after implanting Itachi's. And given the fact that Sasuke has been to that lab, he should know where it is. And I know some like to say that Sasuke destroyed the lab, but that was never stated or shown. All Sasuke did was destroy the entrance to that building while battling the White Zetsu when he decided to leave. Nothing suggests that Sasuke destroyed the entire lab or the contents within it. Now obviously those eyes wouldn't have survived for so long without some kind of maintenance, so it is also possible that Sasuke went back for them and stored them away in some sort of stasis pod, which means that it's either in the hands of the Leaf Village or Orochimaru. So maybe Sasuke saved them because of some sentimental value attached to them and later for the day his daughter would need them. The only issue with this is whether or not this would work for Sarada. As I pointed out in my video on why Itachi didn't just swap eyes with Sasuke, swapping eyes wouldn't work because one has to go blind and lose access to their Sharingan. You see, what most people missed during Itachi's explanation of the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan is how Kishimoto chose to visualize this process and certain key words that were used. Now one of these visual elements used was this weird looking Shinigami. It had the Rinnegan symbol on his forehead and 2 additional eyes, which only manifested after Madara took his Zuna's eyes. We know this to be true because when Itachi showed his own Shinigami, it also had 4 eye sockets, but only had 2 eyes. And that's because, as Itachi puts it, Sasuke has his spare eyes. So if Itachi had taken Sasuke's eyes, his Shinigami would look similar to Madara's after he took his Zuna's, thus achieving its true transformation. Now does this mean that the Shinigami is a real thing that is actually there, a phantom haunting the cursed Tsuchiya? Not necessarily. It could be, but it could also be the case that Kishimoto is simply using it to show what's happening when someone awakens the Eternal Mangekyo. Now one could argue that if Itachi was successful in taking the eyes of Sasuke, wouldn't Sasuke then be able to take Itachi's discarded eyes for himself, then fill the missing slots of his own Shinigami and awaken EMS for himself as well? Well, we've already established that the story outright portrays this to not be the case multiple times. First, in the case where Madara took the eyes of his brother Izuna, the story portrays it as Madara killing his brother to strengthen his powers. Both by Itachi coming to the conclusion that killing a blood relative allows one to obtain eternal ocular powers, and Obito, while pretending to be Madara, describing it as a sacrifice. If this was the case, that the discarded eyes would still be usable after one achieves the Eternal Mangekyo, there would be no need to kill one sibling. They could simply swap eyes and everyone would have an eternal Mangekyo, or at least still possess a usable dojutsu. So the question isn't whether Sasuke would be able to do this, but more so why isn't he? Now the answer to this question can only be one thing, which is that once an Uchiha takes the eyes of a blood relative, the power of their own eyes gets sealed away. So once Madara implanted the eyes of Izuna, his own eyeballs became unusable, and the light they once possessed was then combined with Izuna's. So even if Izuna was to take Madara's eyes, not only wouldn't he awaken the eternal Mangekyo, he would also be blind, and the Shinigami's eye slots would be empty. That is what it means to awaken the eternal Mangekyo. One isn't just stealing the eyes of the other person, they're also taking the light which reflects that power into them. That is also why the physical change of the Mangekyo's pattern happens as well. When Sasuke took Itachi's eyes, he still kept his own Mangekyo pattern, which then merged with Itachi's. The same thing happened when Madara took the eyes of Izuna, but why? Why did they retain the old pattern and abilities despite losing the eyes that manifested them? Well, some would argue that since the powers of the Uchiha comes from the chakra released from the brain, the Uchiha should be able to manifest that power in any eyeball. Now the problem with this argument is that it's shown not to be the case multiple times. Obito never manifested his left Mangekyo powers or design in the spare Sharingan he used for years. And the same thing with Madara after he gave his eyes to Nagato, and even when he took Akashi's eyes in the war as well. So even though the powers of the Sharingan reflects the heart, which then releases chakra from the brain itself into the eyeballs, the spare eyes used by Madara and Obito for decades never manifested their powers or the dojutsu design. This process only occurs when eyes are taken from a blood relative, who then goes on to awaken the eternal Mangekyo. So the eye that is discarded then loses its light, and so does the person a new pair was taken from, which is why this process is seen as a sacrifice. So since the light of Sasuke's Sharingan was already transferred into his eternal Mangekyo, would Sarada be able to use his old eyes? I don't think so. The same way Uzuna couldn't just take Madara's discarded eyes and use them for himself, and why Sasuke wouldn't have been able to do the same thing if Itachi was able to take his eyes. Now I could be wrong, of course, and maybe since Sarada is the third person in a transfer, then that makes it possible to reawaken those eyes for some reason. Now Madara's eyes of course wouldn't have this problem since those eyes have the eternal Mangekyo, so that seems like a better bet. Who knows, maybe Sarada takes Hidari's eyes and this video was all for naught. At number 4 we have Naruto's next form is broken.
Bring it on, Otsutsuki. You want to see what true resolve is? I'll show you.
Naruto was sealed away over 3 years ago and a lot has happened since then. The power ceiling has dramatically increased, so it stands to reason that Naruto's power level would increase alongside it. The real question is how? Well, I have an idea. This all goes back to where Naruto is currently stored and the chakra that was used to create that location. You see, I believe that Naruto will be able to tune his absorption ability to the energy within that time space. This along with the person that created that dimension will then determine how powerful Naruto will become. Now, I know this might sound crazy, but let me explain why it makes perfect sense. Let's go back to when Naruto was first sealed away in chapter 77. This is really important since the concept of time being frozen implies that everything would freeze in place, including all matter and energy. So if Naruto was placed inside a dimension where time is frozen, it would stand to reason that he wouldn't change position. Yet when paying close attention to chapter 77, that is exactly what happened. You see, Naruto had a shocked expression on his face when he was first sent away by Kawaki, and his body was in an awkward position. Yet fast forward to chapter 1 of Two Blue Vortex, that's no longer the case. Naruto's stance for some reason has somehow changed, and though one can explain this away by saying Kawaki manually adjusted him, that doesn't make sense for his facial expression. So aside from Naruto's eyes, which again Kawaki could have manually adjusted, his entire facial expression has changed. He's no longer shocked or angry, he seems to be peacefully asleep. Why is that? Again, this is a timeless dimension, which means that time doesn't flow. And this isn't some assumption being made without evidence. This was stated by Kawaki, Ishiki, and even the official Boruto database on his website. So why is it that Naruto entered this dimension in one state, but now is in another state which would imply that time has passed. But that's where this gets a bit interesting. You see, one possibility is time dilation. This happens if the new dimension exists in a different flow of time. So the person might experience it like a dream or a suspended state until their consciousness syncs up with the new reality. What this means is that the reason why Naruto fell unconscious is likely due to the effect of being transported to that dimension, which has a different flow in time. Now, one could argue that Naruto should still have that expression if he was instantly sent to that time space, and I would agree. I was also stuck on that point for a very long time, and then I remembered that the space-time vortex functions very differently. So if you go back to the episode when Boruto went to save Naruto from Momoshiki's dimension, Sasuke's portal displayed the path that was traveled. The same thing happened when Kawaki transported them to Jigen's dimension. Everyone hopped in seconds before Kawaki, yet all of them popped out at relatively the same time. And Mitsuki's arms are no longer wrapped around Boruto and Sarada, despite the movement caused by this ability being described as instantaneous. So clearly this implies that there's a path between the 2 points that's only perceivable by the ones traveling within it. Now I say this to say that it is possible that Naruto and Hinata both fell unconscious while traveling the path of this time space, which then gradually applied its effect onto them. Now this is also relevant to Naruto being able to absorb the energy within this time space, because the effects of time dilation would only be temporary, which is until the person adapts to the new reality. So it might be the case that after some time within the 3-year period, Naruto regains some level of consciousness while still not being able to move. With that said, some would argue that even if Naruto regained some level of consciousness, he still wouldn't be able to attract the energy within that time space, and that's if energy does exist in that time space. Now those are 2 separate points which I'm going to address, but let's start with the existence of energy within Ishiki's dimension. You see, there's this big misconception that if one exists in a location that doesn't have a tree, then there's no nature energy. This of course is the furthest thing from the truth. As stated by Kurama, nature energy is what circulates the world. It exists in the soil, the water, and even the air itself. This of course is very important since solar energy is also a form of natural energy, which Teneru was able to absorb in Naruto the Last. This means that if Ishiki's dimension has a sun, Naruto might be able to absorb that energy. Now the reason why I say this is because Kawaki was able to see inside that dimension, which implies that there is some light source. This doesn't have to be a fully fledged sun, it could be multiple stars or even one. That in and of itself is energy which Naruto might be able to absorb. Now another possibility is that there are objects within this time space that emits its own light, which should also be a form of energy. It could be similar to the space displayed by the time travel turtle or Jigen's augmented reality, which suspiciously has cubes similar to the ones in Ishiki's dimension. The point is that where there is light, there is energy, and if these cubes are the ones outputting that energy, they might also consist of Ishiki's chakra. Now, I know the argument can be made that Naruto doesn't have the ability to absorb chakra itself. The only time he did something similar to this would be when he extracted a portion of the Ninetales chakra, which of course isn't the same as taking in chakra present within an area. With that said, I would argue that if someone could do it, it would be Naruto. You see, this all goes back to experience. Naruto knows how to absorb nature energy, which in principle would be similar to absorbing another type of energy such as chakra. He just needs to tune his focus to that energy instead. Similar to how Boruto tuned his focus to the energy generated by the planet. That of course is not the same as nature energy, which is outright stated in Boruto's database. The same could be said for anyone else that could absorb chakra outside of the Rinnegan, such as Madara, Yoroi from part 1, and even Jirobo from the Sound 4. This isn't a Kekkei Genkai, it's something one can learn. And Naruto has the fundamentals, such as being able to extract the chakra from the Ninetales, absorb nature energy, and even share his own chakra with others. So I wouldn't be surprised if Naruto sat in his mindscape, which he might still be able to access, and simply trained himself to be able to absorb the chakra within that dimension. With that said, let's address the mechanic by which he would be able to attract this energy in a dimension where time doesn't flow. This all goes back to Kawaki being able to see, which would only make sense if light energy is able to move in that time space. This goes back to the function of sight itself, which operates on 3 main things: a light source, an object, and a person viewing that object. So first, the light source would need to emit that energy. The energy then hits the object, which then reflects the light into one's eye. Now, this of course wouldn't be possible if time was fully frozen, because the light energy itself, or the photon particles, would also be stuck in place. Now, some of course would argue that if light was already in that dimension before Naruto arrived, then that would simply make him visible to Kawaki, and I totally understand why you'd think that. The issue with this is that even if the existing light particles are now touching Naruto's skin, they still wouldn't be able to bounce back to Kawaki's eye, which is what would register Naruto's image. This, by the way, can't be explained away by saying that Kawaki is immune to his time-space, since the function of sight isn't solely dependent on Kawaki's body, but also the light particles that needs to reach his body and hit his retina. So the only way this would make sense is if the light energy within that time space is exempt from the time freeze. This would of course allow those light rays to hit Naruto and then bounce back to Kawaki, thus providing vision. By the way, thinking about it, this would make perfect sense since the light energy would be a byproduct of Ishiki's chakra, assuming that the light within that dimension is emitted by the cubes. Either way, I would argue that everything within that time space would be a byproduct of Ishiki since he created the time space. It's his time space, which would explain why he's immune to the effects of it. So whatever the light source is, the logic would still apply. Now, this would in turn mean that the energy hitting Naruto's body is Ishiki's, and that would be the energy Naruto would be taking in. By the way, I would argue that Naruto developing awareness over time while being frozen is likely a byproduct of his Otsutsuki lineage. This was first hinted at in chapter 10 where Boruto was able to perceive and sense Momoshiki's presence when he first stopped time. Momoshiki attributed this to the fact that Boruto carries some Byakugan blood, which in essence is the blood of the Otsutsuki. Now I know some interpreted this to mean Hyuga blood since they do possess the Byakugan, but the Byakugan is the base dojutsu of the Otsutsuki, and anyone who has the blood of the Otsutsuki has that genetic trait, even if they never awaken it. The same applies to Boruto, who possesses this blood but doesn't have a Byakugan. So in this case, Boruto noted that time had stopped, but he wasn't able to move. This changed later on in chapter 72 after Boruto became full Otsutsuki. Time was once again frozen during this phenomenon, but unlike the other times this happened, Boruto was now able to move. So if I were to follow this logical thread, this implies that the more Otsutsuki a person is, the less of an effect time stop has on them. Now, just like Boruto, this event was also perceived by Sasuke with his Tomei Rinnegan, which makes sense since this power also stems from the blood of the Otsutsuki. With that said, when it came to Naruto, he wasn't able to move nor perceive this event, so why even argue this point? Well, look at it this way. If the argument is that Boruto gained more access to his bodily functions, the more Otsutsuki he became, it would stand to reason that your perception level within time freeze is tied to that percentage. So Boruto, even prior to receiving the Karma Seal, is likely more Otsutsuki than Sasuke and Naruto. That's because he received both halves of Kaguya's bloodline. This of course would be Hagoromo's from Naruto's side and Hamura's from Hinata's side. So in a sense, his blood is simply less diluted. Not to mention the fact that the Hyuga themselves are known for inbreeding, which will also give him a stronger strain of the Otsutsuki gene. The same applies to Sasuke, by the way, since for the most part the Uchiha kept it in-house, which is why they all look similar to one another. Naruto, on the other hand, on top of not having both halves of Kaguya's bloodline, he's also tainted by Minato's Namikaze blood, which hasn't been tied back to Hagoromo. The point of this is to say that both Boruto and Sasuke have a stronger strain of the Otsutsuki gene, and the same applies to Himawari as stated by Kurama. So their perception level within time freeze would be greater than Naruto's, not to mention the fact that Sasuke literally has an Otsutsuki eye that enhances perception. Now this might be a stretch, but it might be the case as well that over the course of being inside that dimension, Naruto simply adapted and regained some level of consciousness. So unlike Boruto, who is now able to move, and Sasuke that could see what's happening, Naruto is able to sense it. So Naruto at this point in time is aware of his surrounding and the energy within it, which he will then go on to absorb, thus enhancing his power. Now of course the next question would be, how would this enhance Naruto's power? He's just collecting chakra, and once he's free from that dimension, the best he could do is just fire off some abilities and then go back to being the regular Naruto, right? Well, not necessarily. Let me ask you this question. Why do you think Naruto has the crazy amounts of chakra he possesses? Or why do you think his stamina is so impressive? Is it because he's an Uzumaki, a Namikaze? Is it because he's a descendant of Hagoromo? Or is it because he's a reincarnation of Ashura? Well, the most popular take is that it comes from being an Uzumaki because they possess a lot of chakra. This of course is one of the biggest misconceptions in Naruto. The Uzumaki themselves don't possess extraordinary amounts of chakra. They instead possess powerful chakra. This was implied by Kushina in chapter 500 when she said that she was born with a particularly powerful chakra, strong enough to suppress the Nine Tails. She then states that the first Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails was also an Uzumaki, which made it a tradition. Now the reason why I said she implied this to be the case is the fact that she said strong even from her village, and that she had a particularly powerful chakra. So even she's separating herself from the rest of them, which implies that this isn't the norm for the Uzumaki, but also saying that the first Nine-Tails Jinchuriki was also Uzumaki. So I think this pretty much implies that the Uzumakis do have powerful chakra, but hers was even more special. So Naruto likely has this powerful chakra as well, but to a lesser extent since he's only half Uzumaki. This was even shown by the fact that Naruto almost died immediately after the Nine-Tails was extracted, while Kushina survived for much longer while still being active and conscious. They also have a stronger life force as well, which could have influenced that, of course. Though there's this one panel where Hagoromo outright tells Naruto that he didn't inherit any of his parents' abilities, which shoots down the nepotism allegations. He also didn't inherit these strengths from being Ashura's reincarnate or Hagoromo's descendant. Both his abundance in chakra and increased stamina came from the Nine-Tails. The stamina portion was confirmed in part 1, where Kakashi states that it's the influence of the Nine-Tails Fox that makes his stamina so amazing, but that is also the reason behind his poor chakra control. Now, as for his large chakra pool, this also links back to the Nine-Tails. You see, it was later explained that Minato constructed the tetragram seal so that a little bit of chakra continuously leaked out of the Nine-Tails cage, which would then be skimmed off in hopes of naturally becoming one with Naruto's chakra. This of course did happen, which is why Naruto attributed his high chakra amount to the Nine-Tails chakra, which leaked into his own chakra pool. So what this implies is that there's a difference between taking chakra from something else or someone else and placing that in another section of your body, which is what Naruto did when he awakened KCM1, as opposed to merging that chakra with your own chakra, thus amplifying it. So it's kind of a similar principle to Baron mode or even Sage mode. So this process seemed to have permanently amplified Naruto's innate chakra and chakra production potential, which is why he's able to produce excess amounts of chakra even without access to the Nine-Tails. So take this and then apply it to Ishiki's chakra within that dimension. Naruto had over 3 years of continuous exposure to this energy, where he's making a conscious effort to absorb it, thus amplifying his own power. So that is why I think Naruto gets his amp to his own power once he leaves that dimension. Sasuke is likely gonna get something from Hidori's Thorn Soul, and Kishimoto likes to keep them relatively even, so he's definitely going to do something for Naruto as well. By the way, you could take this a step further and say that this dimension was actually created by Shibai, not Ishiki. So the ability that accesses this dimension is of course tied to Ishiki's dojutsu, which might have belonged to Shibai. That is why Shibai's dojutsu has a triangle similar to Ishiki's, which can also reduce the amount of triangles present as seen with Ishiki in chapter 56 and also Kawaki later on in chapter 65. Now what also points to this being the case is the fact that Otsutsuki's normally possess a pair of Byakugan specifically, as it's the base dojutsu of the Otsutsuki. The only person this doesn't apply to is Shibai Otsutsuki, who coincidentally has a dojutsu similar to that of Ishiki's, the same person who has access to Shibai's body. Now this wasn't outright stated, but it does make sense that Ishiki is the one who provided Amado with the cells of Shibai and also told him the story of his evolution. It wouldn't make sense for Ishiki not to know that Amado was using the cells of Shibai to strengthen the cyborgs, since every member of Kara received them as confirmed by Kashin Koji. Some of these guys even surpassed the power of Jigen, which would warrant some type of reason. Not to mention the ones that actually manifested Shinjutsu abilities such as Ada, Daemon, and Code, which Ishiki would likely recognize similar to Momoshiki. So the most likely case, and this is just a theory by the way, is that Kaguya and Ishiki upon arriving on the planet discovered Shibai's corpse, which Ishiki then extracted his dojutsu from and then stored his body in his newly awakened timeless dimension. Now the timeline here is very important since Ishiki had to have taken the dojutsu before his battle with Kaguya, since that's what he used to shrink to a very small size. So Shibai's dojutsu now being a part of Ishiki's body would now be a part of the data backed up to karma, which would then be implanted into Kawaki. So if this is the case, it would mean that the energy Naruto would be absorbing belongs to Shibai Otsutsuki, which of course is significantly stronger than Ishiki's. Now this is just a possibility, don't destroy me in the comments guys, I'm just saying, this is very plausible.
Why, you bastard! What have you done to me?
At number 3 we have Kaguya was the original Shinju.
I shall rule over this entire world, together with my children.
The Shinjus in Boruto are one of the most interesting aspects of Two Blue Vortex. These entities are not just overpowered, but they add an intriguing dynamic to the story itself. Now, for all intents and purposes, the story does portray this entity as the first of its kind. But is that really true? Well, I have it on good authority that this isn't necessarily the case, because the first Shinju was actually Kaguya. You see, the crazy thing about this is that it was hinted at multiple times in the story, and this even goes back to Naruto's manga. Now, for this to make sense, we first need to understand what the Shinju are, which are in essence divine tree people. I mean, the name itself literally translates to divine tree, so that much should be evident. With that said, this does go a bit deeper than that, because the divine tree simply doesn't become a Shinju. It also needs access to the consciousness of someone else, and in this case, that person was Kaguya. Now, to understand what I mean by this, we first need to go back to chapter 690 of Naruto's manga, when Kaguya herself transformed into the Getter statue. This left many readers confused, since Kaguya is of course a completely separate entity from the Ten Tails itself. So if anything, the Ten Tails should have been extracted from her body as well, as was the case for the other Biju and Madara's body. Yet what ended up happening is that not only did Kaguya transform into the Getter statue, that being the body of the Ten Tails, she was also sealed alongside it. Now, this might seem like it shouldn't make sense, but it does, and it also leads back to Kaguya being a Shinju. You see, this ties into Kaguya's backstory, which is that she came to Earth with Ishiki, betrayed him, stole the chakra fruit, and later had 2 children. This should be familiar to everyone, so there's no need to fully recap the story itself. What is important to point out is that Hagoromo and Hamura didn't actually fight Kaguya as depicted in the anime. In fact, they didn't actually seal Kaguya on the moon. Well, they actually did, but it's a bit more complicated. You see, as stated by Black Zetsu in chapter 681, the Ten Tails isn't just the divine tree, it's Kaguya herself as well. So it wasn't the divine tree's incarnation trying to reclaim its chakra fruit. It was actually Kaguya's will attempting to take back the chakra that was dispersed into her 2 children. He even mentioned that Hagoromo himself didn't know this truth, which refers back to him telling Naruto that they had battled the Ten Tails, which was the incarnation of the divine tree. Now, this simply means that Hagoromo didn't know that Kaguya had merged with the Ten Tails, nor that he was actually battling his own mother. He thought that he was just fighting a mindless beast trying to reclaim the power taken from its fruit, which the 2 brothers now possessed. By the way, this is backed up by the fact that it's stated by Hagoromo himself that they battled the Ten Tails to atone for the crimes Kaguya left behind, which means that Kaguya wasn't even present at that time. With that said, the point of all of this is to show that instead of being consumed by the Ten Tails, Kaguya found a way to merge with the Ten Tails instead. This then led to Kaguya awakening her own unique Biju form, which pretty much manifested in the form of a giant rabbit. In fact, she then became the 10th tail of the Ten Tails, as shown when all the Biju was extracted from the host's body. So this explains why in Naruto the last movie, it is stated that Hamura stayed on the moon to guard the Ten Tails, not Kaguya, because they didn't know that Kaguya was also the Ten Tails, which by the way is backed up by this databook statement. So in essence, this all adds up to Kaguya's chakra being the same as the Biju chakra, because not only did she consume its chakra fruit, she also merged with the beast as well and became a Biju. Now, Biju isn't the correct term to use here, since that refers to a tail beast, and Kaguya was of course an entire separate entity that merged with a tail beast. So if the Shinju are divine tree people, which are pretty much divine trees that have a consciousness, wouldn't that same title apply to Kaguya? Let me know in the comments. Now, this does go a bit further, since there's one more similarity that Kaguya shares with the Shinju, which is their need to consume a loved one. You see, the Shinjus possess an innate goal or instinct to consume the person closest to the person they copied. Jiro believes that this is some side effect to them evolving differently, thus changing their instinctual drive, and also that they should give in to it, which should in time reveal their personal targets. So this works out as Hidari wanted to consume Sarada, Matsuri with Konohamaru, Ryu with Gaara, and so on and so forth, yada yada yada. Now, this does start to get a bit tricky when we get to Jiro. You see, his target is Naruto Uzumaki for some reason, and while we can reason why the other Shinjus would be attracted to their targets, it doesn't quite make sense for Jiro as the incarnation of the Ten Tails, as stated in chapter 14. So why would he want to consume Naruto of all people? Well, my initial hypothesis was that the Shinju's targets aren't based on love per se, but more so the person that cloned individual had the deepest connection with. So Sasuke and his daughter, Sarada, Moegi and Konohamaru, and even Bug with Ada with the charm ability, it makes perfect sense. So, in essence, the method by which they share the connection isn't what's relevant. The connection itself is what really matters. So using that same logic, Jura, the incarnation of the Tentals, would in fact have an obsession with consuming Naruto over everyone else, since Naruto has the deepest connection to the Tell Beast at large. And Jura, of course, being the incarnation of the Tentals, has a connection to these other Tell Beasts. This would make perfect sense since it is stated that the Tentals is nothing but a fragment of the god tree that created the universe, which should apply to every Tentals. This also implies a connection at the genetic level and could even form a mental link between these entities, which by the way Jura implied was the case for the Shinju by saying that they're still biologically connected. Now this connects back to Kaguya since after merging with the Tentals and becoming a Shinju, the first thing that the Tentals did was to attack Kaguya's sons. Why is that? We know Kaguya decided to take back the power because they turned against her as displayed in the anime continuity, but that didn't take place in the manga. Hagoromo didn't know that Kaguya had merged with the Tentals, nor that it was battling his own mother. As I pointed out before, he thought he was just fighting a mindless beast trying to reclaim the power taken from its fruit. Again, he outright says that they battled the Tentals to atone for the crimes Kaguya left behind, which means that Kaguya wasn't there from his perspective. I don't know, maybe she just left to get some milk and never returned. So yeah, why exactly did the Tentals, which was now Kaguya in Shinju form, attack them? Well, that's because, just like Jura and the other Shinju, Kaguya also had people she cared about, which then manifested in her wanting to devour them, those people of course being her two sons. By the way, this also expounds on what Black Zetsu claimed, which is that this was Kaguya's will attempting to take back the chakra given to her two children. For some reason, she never tried doing this before, but on the same day that she mysteriously disappeared and became a Shinju, she just magically wanted to consume them for some reason. Black Zetsu outright says that it's Kaguya's will, and he should know this since he's also Kaguya's will. So it is somewhat true that it was the instincts of the Tentals influencing Kaguya to consume just like the Shinju, but what she wanted to consume was based on who Kaguya herself had a bond with. By the way, this development of the Tentals being humanoid similar to the Shinju was shown multiple times in Naruto. First with the Getter statue itself, which is the body of the Tentals, and even the second form of the Tentals to some degree. The first one literally had the form of a person with hands and feet to match, which the Tentals in Boruto was slowly turning into as well, as seen in chapter 3. There's also the instance where the Tentals in the war spoke to Madara, telling him to absorb it, which shows that the beast itself had a consciousness similar to the Shinju. Now there is this one thing that I did found very weird, which is that Obito both had the god tree planted and the Tentals inside him at the very same time, which is really strange given the fact that the Tentals is the god tree, though it could be the case that he was able to split the Tentals in two for some reason, so it's not that big a deal. Now there is one more thing that we need to cover, which is Kaguya's immortality. You see, there's been this conversation around whether the Shinjus can be killed. This stems from the fact that it was established in Naruto that a Tell Beast will always re-emerge sometime after death. This was first mentioned by Kushina Uzumaki when she offered to take the Nine Tails with her to death so that the interval until it emerges again will be delayed. We also saw this happen with the Three Tails as well after it re-emerged a few years after dying in the body of Rin. So this isn't anything new, nor should it be surprising. Now I do understand that some believe that this will be different for Kurama since Kurama's chakra burnt out due to Baron mode, which implied that this resurrection process wouldn't apply to him. Even so, I want to point out that the story itself never implied this to be the case. Some mostly misinterpreted the Nine Tails, explaining why Naruto wouldn't have died due to losing the Tell Beast, similar to what happened in Shippuden. So the change in the process is that the Biju chakra vanishes from the body instead of being extracted, which is what causes the Jinchuriki to die. There's no indication that this now also means that Kurama wouldn't be able to return. In fact, Kurama said that he came to say farewell so far as that goes. So it was pretty clear that he was going to return, and that indeed happened. Now the question is, does this also apply to the Shinju since they are technically part Biju? Well, the answer is maybe. I've always said that this might not be the case since the Biju were created by Hagoromo using creation of all things. So there's a different factor at play here. So the concept of energy never dies can remain true for the Biju, but does that also apply to their personalities? So let's say Jura gets destroyed completely, even the Thorn Soul Bow. Would he just resurrect after a few years with his personality intact, or would he resurrect at all? I'm not sure. Now, Kaguya is a bit different since you could argue that she has a certain restriction given the fact that her essence was sealed. And as we know from Naruto, sealing even restricts jutsus like Edo Tensei from summoning souls, so that should apply here as well. So could Kaguya reform if the seal is released? The answer is maybe. At number 2 we have Future Boruto is the final villain.
Even so. I'm still a shinobi!
Boruto is becoming the monster everyone fears, the one burdened with a power he never wanted, a fate he can't escape, and the future he's slowly realizing might end with him standing by himself. The karma seal, Momoshiki's presence, the warnings about his destiny, even the way the world is starting to turn against him. It's the same narrative shape that swallowed Eren in Attack on Titan, and the more these parallels line up, the isolation, the pressure, the prophecy, the enemy of the world setting that's being presented, the more clear it becomes. Boruto's ending might already be written, not because the manga said it outright, but because its structure is a mirror of the path that led to Eren's final choice. This all goes back to the clues buried in the panels, the character shifts, the narrative patterns, that all point to a chilling possibility. Boruto may be destined to become the very thing he's fighting against, a future that he himself created. This all clicked for me back in chapter 2 of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, when Boruto first mentioned the horrors of the Ten Tails. We've known about the Ten Tails for many years, but this felt very different. Code reinforced it by explaining what the beast actually does. It devours everyone on instinct until the time they find an Otsutsuki. And the moment I read that line, something snapped into place. It wasn't hinting towards something from Naruto's lore, but more so about the Titans, the pure Titans, and how they devour every human in sight for one purpose, to find the Titan Shifter. Suddenly what Code said wasn't just a one-off sentence, it was more so a mirror. This is the foundation we have to build on. Before we get into Boruto manipulating the past or prescience or Koji withholding future details, we have to break down the deep structural similarities between the Ten Tails and that of the Titans. Because once you understand why these parallels exist, Boruto's entire future suddenly opens up in a way the manga hasn't spelled out as yet, but has been implying for many years. So let's start with Attack on Titan. Over 2,000 years ago, a slave named Ymir ran into the woods and fell into a tree. Inside that tree stood a spine-like parasite floating in the water. It attached to her, she gained the power of the Titans, and she used this power to serve King Fritz, bear his children, and create a lineage whose blood connection allowed the founding Titan's power to manipulate memories for centuries. Her descendants inherited pieces of her power in the form of the 9 Titans. Among the 9 Titans was the founding Titan, which had the ability to turn Eldians into mindless pure Titans. These Titans weren't just randomly attacking humans. Their instinctive purpose was to find a Titan Shifter, someone that carried the true power of Ymir's inheritance. Once they devoured such a person, they could regain humanity and become a Titan Shifter themselves. This structure of a mindless monster devouring indiscriminately but instinctively seeking a specific host is incredibly similar to Ko's description of the Ten Tails. The Ten Tails consumes everyone until it finds an Otsutsuki, and once it does, it evolves into a divine tree, essentially a perfect state, just like a pure Titan consuming a shifter evolves into a true Titan with consciousness. Boruto 2 Blue Vortex expands on this by introducing the Cloggrimes, who are literally Ten Tails derivatives that behave much like the Titans themselves. They devour humans, multiply endlessly, and select their evolutions based on who they consume. Jura, Hidari, Bug, and the others are essentially Titan variants. And this then brings us to the second major similarity, the mechanics behind memory manipulation. Attack on Titan uses the paths, Naruto uses chakra. Both are planet-wide networks that bind consciousness. In Attack on Titan, Eldians are linked because they share Ymir's bloodline. In Naruto, all humans share chakra because Hagoromo gave it to them, and Hagoromo himself carried Kaguya's chakra. This means every human is connected by a literal piece of Kaguya, just like every Eldian is connected by a piece of Ymir. And that connection is what makes large-scale memory manipulation possible. King Fritz used the Founding Titan to erase every Eldian's memory of the outside world. Ada used Omnipotence to rewrite the memories of everyone with chakra, switching Boruto and Kawaki's lives. Momoshiki literally spells it out. Every person's mind is connected through chakra, and the god can meddle with it if they so choose. This is a one-to-one mirror of Attack on Titan's. Subjects of Ymir can be manipulated by the Founding Titan. And then Momoshiki asks Boruto whether he has ever thought about how often a god might have manipulated humans' memories before. Now Boruto obviously hadn't, but we were supposed to as the audience. The line indirectly suggests that the world's history, at least referring to Naruto of course, may have already been warped by a previous user of this power, just like in Attack on Titan, where the Eldians lived entire centuries under false memories. Once I understood this, I realized that Boruto's story isn't simply Naruto but with alien gods. It's a mythology where truths of the past have already been overwritten, and that opens the door for something very big. The idea that Boruto's present is being shaped by someone that already lived the future, which then brings us back to Koji. Koji's prescience lets him see multiple futures, but what's weird is how selective his knowledge is. In chapter 16, he somehow knew every detail about Boruto's Flying Thunder God, not just the technique itself, the reason Boruto created it, the weakness of the ability, and even how Ada would see their conversation and when she would see it. But when it came to simple things such as confirming if the Ten Tails was in Jigen's dimension, Koji suddenly needed verification. He also chose to attack Code on the same day the Ten Tails evolved into the Shinju, instead of a day before, even though he admits that time is running out and the evolution is close to happening. It's almost as if he wanted it to happen, which is very interesting. This inconsistency is important because it mirrors how Eren in Attack on Titan handled the ability of the Attack Titan. The Attack Titan can send memories into the past, but only to previous users of the Attack Titan. Eren Kruger received memories from Eren Yeager, even though Eren wasn't born yet. Grisha received memories from future Eren, which prompted him to massacre the Reese family. And Eren himself inherited those memories by looking into his father's past. Eren didn't have access to the full future. He only saw selected scenes, just the ones future Eren wanted him to see. And future Eren was manipulating the past while knowing how the present Eren would interpret those memories. Prescience in Boruto works similarly. Koji doesn't see the full timeline. He only sees the timelines that have been shaped in a certain direction. And the level of detail he knows about Boruto's abilities versus what he claims to not know suggests he's not the original source of the future knowledge, which leads to the clearest parallel between both series. A future Boruto may be doing exactly what future Eren did. In Attack on Titan, future Eren fed selective memories to past inheritors of the Attack Titan to create the future he needed. He couldn't send the memories to his past self, so he sent them to the people whose memories would eventually be shown to him. Now imagine this in Boruto's world. A future Boruto having lived through the worst possible timeline, the Ten Tails Ascension, planetary extinction, the fall of the village, Kawaki's betrayal, maybe even the loss of Himawari, looks back at his timeline and makes a choice. Using omnipotence, prescience, or some Otsutsuki level version of timeline manipulation, he selectively sends information back into the past. Not to himself, because maybe he can't, similar to Eren. Instead he gives it to Koji, someone he trusts but also someone who can act without revealing everything. This explains why Koji knows some information with perfect detail and other information not at all. Future Boruto only gives him the pieces he needed to keep his timeline on track. This also lines up with Koji receiving updates like care packages. He isn't able to peer into the future whenever he wants to. Coincidentally, his last update came after it was impossible for him to intervene in the changes present time Boruto made, despite those changes being initiated days before the actual battle took place. Yet the ability waited up until the exact moment when Kawaki arrived on the battlefield to save Boruto to then inform Koji of this change, despite requiring multiple changes to the timeline to even get to this point in the first place. This isn't a coincidence. Koji's prescience allows him to see multiple timeline branches, but it isn't omniscient, and it also relies on the cells of Shibai Otsutsuki. It is possible that Future Boruto could hijack this connection if the theory that Boruto becomes Shibai bears true. So while Koji believes he is the player moving the pieces, he is actually a piece being moved by the king, that being Future Boruto, similar to what took place in Attack on Titan. Now there's also another potential similarity as well, which is that just like Irin's endgame required the rumbling to happen, Boruto's endgame may require him to fight Kawaki on the Okage monument. So everything Boruto tried to avoid might end up needing to take place. Maybe the Ten Tails needed to evolve into the Shinju, maybe Jura needed to target Himawari, maybe Kawaki needed to harden his ideology, maybe the village had to fall into this crisis. Boruto may already know this because he has lived through multiple versions of the future. The way Eren experienced future memories that forced him into becoming the catalyst of the world's destruction and basically its rebirth. I mean, look at AOT's finale. Eren erased the Titan curse. He wiped out the power system at the core of the world. Boruto's story hints at something similar. Kawaki declares the age of shinobi is over, but Boruto's existence is directly tied to the Otsutsuki. If Boruto or let's say Kawaki find some way to end the cycle of the Otsutsuki, chakra itself might be altered forever, just like Eren ending the curse of Himir. And by the way, Kawaki said this back in chapter 1 of the Boruto manga, long before AOT ended. So it's not like AOT's influencing Boruto. If anything, both were exploring the same thematic territory at the same time. So what does all of this mean for the ending of Boruto? It means Boruto may become something similar to Eren, a tragic necessity, someone who carries the weight of knowing multiple futures, someone who must allow terrible events to unfold because preventing them makes the outcome worse, someone who shapes the new world by being the last person that remembers the old one. Boruto might be the architect of his own timeline, not because he wants to, but because he has to. The parallels between the Ten Tails and the Titans, between the pathways and chakra networks, between the memory manipulation and omnipotence, between future manipulation and prescience, between Boruto and Eren, between Grisha and Koji, between Mikasa and Sarada, all of these parallels point toward a narrative structure where Boruto becomes a singularity that stands outside fate itself, someone who guides the timeline from both the present and the future. And if that's the case, the ending of Boruto won't be a simple victory. It won't be a final battle where the hero triumphs and returns home. It will be a bittersweet story, a bittersweet resolution where Boruto ends the cycle of the Otsutsuki, removes the power that has plagued humanity for 1,000 years, and gives the world a chance to start over without chakra-based gods rewriting their memories. Just like Eren stopped the Titan curse to give his world a chance, Boruto may end the chakra to give his world a chance as well. And everything happening in Tubu Vortex, Himawari's awakening, Kawaki's isolation, the evolution of the Shinju, Koji's selective future knowledge, the village's collapse might be exactly what's needed to happen for Boruto to reach that point. It's not a prophecy, it's a design, because the future Boruto has lived through the worst timeline, and now he's doing what Eren did, sending messages back to the past, nudging events, shaping outcomes, pushing the present version of himself down a path he doesn't enjoy but ultimately accepts. So by the end of this manga, Boruto might not just be a victim of omnipotence, he might become the one who uses it, not to rule the world, not to change memories, but to end the system entirely. And with that, the story that once looked like a sequel to Naruto will reveal itself as something much closer to the structure of Attack on Titan. A story about cycles, freedom, memory, fate, and the cost of being the only person who can see the ending. That is what the story seems to be building towards. and that's why Boruto's future might already be written, not by fate itself or some omnipotent being, but by himself.
The power of hope slumbers deep within you.
You mean in this eye?
And with that eye, you will shoulder the fate of this world.
At number 1 we have Shibai is Future Boruto. The age of shinobi is over, and I'll send you where I sent the 7th. These two lines have spawned so many theories about Boruto's true ending, and for good reason. Why does Kawaki want to end the age of shinobi? And how does getting rid of Boruto allow that to happen? Well, it all goes back to Shibai Otsutsuki and his plan to save the timeline.
This story begins several years earlier.
You see, there have been so many videos about Shibai's true identity. Some believe that he's Momoshiki in disguise, some believe that he's a model, some even believe that he's just a random background character influencing the events of Boruto's timeline. All of these theories are indeed plausible, but there's one that stands out. In fact, I've made videos in the past about this very thing, which is Boruto himself being Shibai. Now you guys might be saying, if I've made videos on this already, what's the purpose of this one? Well, the answer to that question is that I've made a new discovery. You see, the difference between that theory and this one is the very foundation it was built on, which is that Boruto is Shibai's reincarnate. So in a sense, he's the continuation of someone that existed in the past, his next life per se. While this new theory takes on a different approach, in that Boruto isn't Shibai's reincarnate. He is and always was Shibai himself. Now, this might seem a bit confusing, but let me explain. You see, there's this concept in time travel known as a causal loop or the bootstrap paradox. This is in essence a situation in which an object or piece of information is sent back in time and becomes the cause of its own existence, creating a closed loop. Essentially, there's no clear origin for the item itself. It appears to have always existed because it is a part of a self-perpetuating cycle. In fact, something similar to this has happened in the Boruto universe, which I've mentioned before in prior videos. This took place when Boruto and Sasuke traveled back in time. The younger version of Denki's father, the creator of the train system in the future, overheard Boruto talking about a train system that hadn't yet existed, which inspired him to then create said train system. The future version of himself later attributes the idea for the train system to the random kid he interacted with years prior. That of course being the kid Boruto who traveled to the past. That itself is the bootstrap paradox, since if Boruto learned about it because Denki's father created it, and Denki's father created it because he overheard Boruto talking about it, there's no clear origin to the train system. It's a closed causal loop. It's a paradox. Now this gets even crazier when you apply it to Shibai, and it all goes back to a constant theme in the Boruto anime, which is that it tends to foreshadow later events of the manga. Whether it's Kagemasa's evil eye, a clear reference to Boruto's Jogan, Arami's introduction which had him encased in a Jogan-shaped container with a scar above his right eye, which of course foreshadows the scar Boruto later receives in the manga, and even the clones Shin created that he viewed as tools, but in the end turned against him, similar to Code's situation with the clog rhymes and the Shinju. There are many such cases where the anime hints towards later plotlines, and this bootstrap paradox is no different. But precisely how does it apply to Boruto and Shibai? Well, I believe that current Boruto will eventually become Shibai after evolving into his new Otsutsuki form. He will then travel to the past and become the Shibai known throughout history, thus ensuring the continued existence of the timeline. Now you guys might be saying this doesn't make sense because why would Boruto need to become the Shibai of the past when Shibai existed long before Boruto was born? And you guys would be 100% correct in saying that. But that's why it's a paradox. Boruto was always destined to become Shibai and travel to the past to ensure his future. He is the catalyst that spawned the events which led to the present, and without him the timeline would cease to exist, so he must adhere to his destiny and complete the loop. This is of course the ultimate enemy Boruto faces as decreed by Toneri in the anime, Destiny. Destiny was always his true opponent, something he can't overcome with brute force and must shoulder by himself. Now how does this tie into Kawaki? I did say this explains the Age of Shinobi is overlined in chapter 1, but how? Well, it all goes back to what happens to a timeline if a closed loop is broken. In this case, it could either result in a new timeline where things are different, or it could result in the timeline's total destruction. Now to understand the full weight behind Boruto's decision, I want to explain in detail what I believe will happen. So sometime in the future, everyone comes to learn of this decision Boruto must make. Either continue on the path to evolution or destroy the loop. If Boruto chooses to evolve, he must travel to the past to ensure the loop cycle continues. He does this by taking the name Shibai, which by the way means playing a role. So Boruto plays the role of Shibai by first infiltrating the home of the Otsutsuki, and after building rank among them, he later directs them to Earth's sector, which is what led to Kaguya and Ishiki's arrival in the first place. This ensures that the timeline which created the Shinobi system is born, which also ensures Boruto's birth. The sad part is that he's still Boruto, but he can't live a normal life. He can only watch from afar as to not tamper with the timeline. So he becomes sad and lonely, which is why he discards his body and ascends to a higher plane of existence. The crazy part about this is that he did this under the guise of ascending to godhood through the consumption of chakra fruits, and left instructions to the Otsutsuki for them to do the same thing. So the reason why the Otsutsuki consume planets to gather chakra fruits is because Boruto, who's now Shibai, told them how to do it. He didn't just tell them the location of the planet, he gave them a reason to go there. That's because for the events of Boruto to happen, Kaguya, Momoshiki, and Ishiki must arrive on the planet in search of said chakra fruit. So those chain of events only occur if Boruto travels back in time to be the catalyst, thus ensuring the never-ending cycle. So Boruto has a very big decision to make, ensuring the timeline plays out as it always has, despite knowing that he'll be damned to a miserable life, or break the loop and risk erasing all his loved ones from existence. Very tough. Now, where Kawaki comes in is actually very simple. You see, we know Kawaki hates the Shinobi system. He thinks they're a weak fodder that simply die on the front lines. He suffered in poverty because of that very system as well, which makes this very personal. He also despises the Otsutsuki because all they've ever brought is destruction and suffering. Whether it's for him or the people he cares about, it's all the same. What this means is that it's in Kawaki's best interest to stop Boruto from fulfilling his destiny. If he succeeds, the Otsutsuki as we know it would cease to exist, since Boruto never went back in time to give them their mission of collecting fruits. The Shinobi system also wouldn't exist since it was spawned from Kaguya's arrival and Hagoromo giving chakra to humans. So stopping Boruto fulfills Kawaki's goals that were established in part 1, ending the Age of Shinobi and ending the reign of the Otsutsuki, at least as we know it. And he does this by sending Boruto where he sent the 7th, which of course is a dimension where time doesn't flow. So since Boruto is in a dimension where time doesn't flow, he can't influence time, nor will he ever evolve to the point where he could. Now one could say, why doesn't Kawaki just kill Boruto to ensure that this never happens? Well, that could be because he simply grows to care about him and would rather seal him away. Or it could also be the case that he can't be killed. You see, if Boruto is truly essential to completing the loop, meaning the entire timeline depends on him becoming Shibai and going back in time, then yes, the timeline would certainly protect him to preserve itself. This could manifest in attacks on Boruto always being interrupted by someone or something, an ally arriving just in time as seen with Kawaki, or an enemy being distracted by another conveniently pressing matter, as seen when Jiro left to go revive Hidari, which he himself attributed to Boruto being protected by divine intervention. Some believe that this is Shibai now actively influencing these events from a higher plane of existence, but that isn't the case. The truth is that the timeline itself is protecting Boruto because without him, it would cease to exist. So Kawaki must find a loophole around killing Boruto because that action itself is blocked by fate, which of course leaves us with Daikokuten, a dimension where time doesn't flow. So in essence, if Boruto is removed from time itself, it can no longer protect him, which means he could end Boruto in that time space. This ensures that all the things that Kawaki hates about this world never occurs, and he's willing to end everything if there's even a small chance that Naruto might get to live in a world absent of these threats. The problem, of course, is that the chance is very small. Yes, breaking a causal loop could result in the history being rewritten to where the events caused by that loop didn't occur. So Earth would just be a normal planet with no superpowered humans or god trees and the Otsutsuki. Just the normal strife between mankind, which I'm sure Kawaki is aware of, but deems preferable to what they have now. The flip side of this is the total destruction of the timeline itself, and everyone simply ceases to exist because it becomes too unstable, which actually is more likely. Boruto doesn't want to take that risk, but Kawaki does, which is what leads to that conflict. At this point, everything should start to make sense. Boruto is a star of hope against the destruction that will eventually come to pass, as stated by Toneri. And Kawaki, of course, is the apostle of destruction, as stated in the Boruto database, because his actions would result in the destruction of the timeline. So Boruto's real opponent is destiny, because if he doesn't find a way to change it without the destruction of the timeline, he's bound to a miserable existence. So playing the role of Shibai, the past, the present, the future, it's all interconnected, which is crazy. But you know what's also crazy? Only 22% of you guys subscribing to the channel, and only 2 of you currently being a member. Shoutouts to Iki and Christian, by the way. In any case, if you guys are enjoying the videos, consider supporting the channel so I can continue to, make them. With that said, let's get back to the video. Now, given what I said before, it all makes sense why Boruto's horn looks like Shibai despite receiving his karma from Momoshiki. It isn't because he's a descendant of Shibai or because he received Shibai's cells. No, it's because Boruto had Otsutsuki DNA prior to receiving Momoshiki's karma, since he's a descendant of Kaguya. So that data mixed with Momoshiki's and Kinshiki's, thus creating a brand new horn with elements of all of that data. So Boruto doesn't have that horn because of Shibai. Shibai has that horn because of Boruto, because Boruto becomes Shibai. At this point in time, his evolution into Shibai has already begun. That's why he hasn't heard from Momoshiki in over 2 years, and why he can't use the Karma Seal without losing himself. They're slowly merging into one entity, which began with their brainwaves crossing over. Once this process is complete, a new evolution will occur, thus the birth of Shibai. Now, you might be wondering why this happens. Why will Momoshiki merge with Boruto and create this new form? Well, that part is actually quite simple. It all goes back to Boruto himself being part Otsutsuki and strongly inheriting their power. We have to remember that Momoshiki evolved to this state after consuming Kinshiki and merging his essence with him. A similar process is taking place with Momoshiki and Boruto, because you have Boruto's innate Otsutsuki essence merging with Momoshiki's, which will in the end result in the creation of a new form. This form might be controlled by Boruto's consciousness, or might be a completely different person, who is the result of both personalities of Momoshiki and Boruto merging into one. With that said, this also explains some other similarities as well. Some have pointed out that the ability Shibai uses in this panel looks similar to Rasengan Uzuhigo. Well, that's because it is Rasengan Uzuhigo, since Boruto is Shibai. Some have pointed out that the damage to Shibai's clothing on his right hand looks very similar to the damage to Boruto's clothing in the flash forward scene. And that, I believe, is because it is after this fight that Boruto evolves into this new form. It would also rip apart his pants, which explains the tattered look from the back, but of course I could be reaching there and it's not really that relevant to the overall theory. By the way, I also noticed that this garment is somewhat different from this one in this panel, because this one is ripped apart and this one isn't. Which could imply that this one is from when he just transformed and this one is after he went back into the past, and that would make sense since this one was used to explain how he ascended, which we know happens in the past, not the future. I also think that this panel being a future event implies that Jura will succeed in cultivating the divine tree, likely using Akebi as the Otsutsuki substitute. And Boruto of course will gain the power to stop it after evolving, which could be a part of the entire closed loop. So Boruto must evolve into Shibai to save the planet, and must also go back in time to ensure that all the events play out as they should, so that this moment happens. It's kinda crazy. Now finally, there's also the Jogan and its connection to Ada and Damon. I've always said that it's strange how Ada's Senringan is a crescent moon and Damon has a half moon, and of course Boruto's Jogan is a full moon, which led me to believe that Amado was trying to recreate the Jogan. And then of course when we saw Shibai for the first time, that then changed to Shibai has the Jogan and Ada and Damon's dojutsu are simply pieces of the puzzle because of course they have Shibai's cells. Now that is still partly true, but it makes more sense now that we know Boruto is Shibai and he left his body where it would be discovered so that Ada and Damon would be able to receive his cells. Same for Kashin Koji, who now has prescience because of Shibai's cells, and he's using that power to help Boruto in his journey to becoming Shibai. What this means is that Boruto in the future will have the power to use the Senringan, Damon's reflection, prescience, and omnipotence all by himself, which is likely how Boruto will reverse the effects of omnipotence. In fact, we've seen Boruto use a Senringan-esque ability with the Jogan in part 1, when he was able to see and hear what Shikadai was saying from another dimension, which is the Noi dimension by the way, which is something Ada can do with her dojutsu. So again, the anime is just rich with foreshadowing, and I'm sure I could find more if I watched all of it, but I don't think I will. With that said, that is it for the video. If you guys liked it, drop a like, and also if you guys want to learn more about Boruto's connection to the Matrix and how it might predict the ending of Boruto, check out the video on screen.